The great hall of the alien palace was filled with silence. A human soldier named David stood in chains before the alien queen. She was tall, powerful, and feared by all, her golden crown shining under the strange lights around her throne. Alien. Nobles whispered in low voices, some laughing at the human's weakness. Some demanding his death. David knew he was only a prisoner. A joke for their entertainment, the queen rose from her throne and walked closer. Her long robe flowing like liquid fire. Her sharp eyes studied the human as if she was looking into his soul. David could feel the weight of her gaze. It was heavier than the chains on his wrists. Still, he tried to stand tall. Even in front of her, the queen spoke, her voice calm but filled with power. Human soldier, your army lost, your people ran, and yet you stand here? What do you have left to say for yourself? David swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew this could be his last moment alive. The court expected him to beg or cry, but instead, he smiled. It was foolish. But he did not want to give them the pleasure of fear, and then, in a bold and reckless moment, he said, "You'd make a cute wife." The hall exploded in shock. The nobles gasped. Some laughed loudly. Others shouted in anger. Blasphemy. One alien screamed, "Kill him now!" Another demanded, but the queen did not move. Her golden eyes locked on him, her face unreadable. The silence grew heavy. Like a storm waiting to strike, everyone waited for her order. The death of the human, but instead, something impossible happened. The queen's lips curved into the smallest smile. Her voice was soft but clear. Agreed? The hall froze. Even the guards holding David stepped back in shock. Did she really say yes? Duh. Alien Queen just agreed to a human's joke. David's heart pounded in his chest. He thought maybe he misheard her. Maybe it was a trick. But the queen turned to her court and said, "This human belongs to me now. He will not be executed." Whispers spread like wildfire. Belongs to her. Is he her pet? Has our queen lost her mind? The nobles argued, but no one dared to challenge her directly. Her word was law, and her word had just spared the human. David, still in chains, could not believe what was happening. He only meant it as a joke. A final act of bravery before death. But now that joke had changed everything. The queen walked back to her throne and sat down. Her golden crown gleamed, her eyes never leaving David. Finally, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the noise. "Take him to my chamber." The words sent another wave of shock across the hall. David was dragged away by guards, his mind spinning. What did she mean by my chamber? Was he still a prisoner or something else? As the heavy doors of the throne room closed behind him, David felt the weight of fate pressing down. The joke he made had turned into something far more dangerous. He had stepped into a game he did not understand, and now every choice could cost him his life. But deep inside, a strange thought echoed in his mind. She agreed. The story was only beginning, and David had no idea whether he had just found his death, or something far more terrifying. The guards dragged David through long halls made of black stone. Strange lights glowed on the walls, showing carvings of alien battles, victories, and ancient queens. Every step echoed, and the silence of the palace felt heavy. David's wrists were still bound, but his heart was free. He kept hearing the queen's words in his mind. "Take him to my chamber." What did she mean? Was this some kind of twisted game? He had mocked her with a foolish joke. Yet instead of killing him, she had claimed him. David tried to stay calm. But every guard who looked at him had hate in their eyes. They wanted him dead, not standing inside their holy palace. At last, the doors opened, and he was pushed into a vast chamber. It was nothing like the cold halls outside. The room glowed with warm light. Soft fabrics hung from the walls, and the air smelled of sweet alien flowers. At the center stood a Bed carved from crystal, large enough for a giant. David stared in disbelief. This looked more like a place for a royal guest. Not a prisoner. The guards left him there, locking the doors behind them. David rubbed his wrists, trying to free himself from the tight chains, but before he could think further, the doors opened again. The alien queen entered. Her long robe brushing the floor, her golden eyes fixed on him. Sharp yet curious, for a moment, David forgot he was in danger. Her presence filled the entire chamber, heavy and beautiful. "You are bold, human," she said softly. Walking closer, "No one has ever spoken to me like that in my own hall." David gave a nervous laugh. "I thought it would be my last words, Your Majesty. Figured I'd go out with a joke." The queen tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "You joke. But you do not fear me," David answered. "Fear doesn't help much, does it?" I was already ready to die for a moment. The queen's expression changed. Something almost like respect flashed in her eyes. She circled him slowly, studying him like a rare creature. Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "My people see you as weak, but I see something else." David shifted uneasily. "And what's that?" The queen stopped in front of him, her golden crown glinting under the chamber lights. "A challenge," she said. Her words sent a chill down his spine. Was this a test? Was she playing with him? He tried to read her face, but her expression was unreadable. She clapped her hands, and alien servants entered, carrying trays of food and strange glowing drinks. The chains were finally removed from David's wrists. He rubbed his sore skin. Surprised by the sudden kindness, the queen sat at the crystal table and motioned for him to join. He hesitated, but then slowly sat across from her. The servants placed food before them, meats that shifted colors, fruits that sparkled, and drinks that smoked like mist. David had no idea if it was safe for him. The queen watched him with interest. "Eat, human, in my palace. None shall harm you while you sit at my table." David picked up a strange fruit. Biting carefully, to his shock, it tasted sweet, almost like honey. The queen smiled faintly at his reaction. "You expected poison?" "Honestly," David said, "yes. The court outside might have killed him if they had the chance, but here he was, eating dinner with the most powerful alien in the galaxy." It felt unreal as they ate. The queen asked questions. "What do humans value most? Why do you fight wars? Why do you protect each other?" David answered as best he could, using simple words. He spoke of family, of loyalty, of laughter. Things that seemed small, but were everything to humans. The queen listened closely, her eyes softening in moments, though she quickly hid it again. Finally, when the meal ended, she leaned forward, her voice low. "Human, tell me this. When you said I would make a cute wife, did you speak only as a fool, or was there truth in your words?" David froze, his heart racing. This was not the question he expected. He looked into her golden eyes, trying to find an answer. He wanted to laugh it off, call it a joke again. But something in her gaze stopped him before he could reply. The queen stood. Her robe swirled around her as she walked toward the door. She paused, her voice echoing in the chamber. "Tomorrow, you will prove your worth to me and to my people. Human, if you succeed, you may live. If you fail, you will not see another sunrise." The doors closed behind her, leaving David alone in the glowing chamber. His heart pounded harder than ever. Prisoner or groom? He didn't know the answer. But one thing was certain: tomorrow would decide everything. The next day arrived too quickly for David. He had spent the night in the queen's chamber, staring at the ceiling of crystal, unable to rest. Her final words echoed again and again. Tomorrow, you will prove your worth. But what kind of test waited for him? A trial, a fight, or something worse? The morning came with the sound of alien horns. Guards entered and ordered him to follow. David walked through wide halls, filled with banners of alien victories at the end of the path. The doors opened into a grand dining hall. The room was massive, with long crystal tables glowing faintly under blue flames. Nobles from across the empire sat in rows, their strange eyes all turning to the human. Some sneered, others whispered behind their jeweled hands. David felt the weight of their stares. Like knives against his skin, at the far end, on a throne-like chair, sat the queen herself. Her robe today shimmered with silver threads, and her crown burned like a star. When David entered, silence filled the hall. The queen raised her hand, and all the whispers died. "Sit," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. A chair was pulled out for David, right beside her. The nobles gasped, for no outsider had ever sat so close to their ruler. David hesitated but obeyed. Feeling the icy hatred from the crowd, the feast began. Servants placed dishes across the tables. Strange meats that pulsed faintly as if alive, fruits that glowed, and bowls of liquid that steamed like fire. David stared at the food, unsure if it was safe. The queen noticed and smiled faintly. "You fear poison again?" she asked softly. David gave a half smile. "Let's just say I don't trust glowing meat." Some nobles laughed mockingly, but the queen did not. Instead, she picked up a slice of the strange meat herself and took a slow bite. "Now you may eat," she said, her golden eyes fixed on him. David picked up a fruit that looked like a red crystal and bit into it. Surprisingly, it was sweet, like strawberries mixed with honey. He nodded. "Not bad." The queen's lips curved slightly, almost amused as the meal went on. The queen began to question him. Her voice was steady and her eyes sharp. "Tell me, human, do your kind understand loyalty?" David swallowed and answered, "Yes, loyalty is everything for us. Without it, we lose family, we lose trust." She leaned closer. "And sacrifice. Would you give your life for another?" David thought for a moment, then said, "If the person mattered, yes." The nobles whispered angrily, some shaking their heads. One of them shouted, "Lies. Humans only serve themselves." The queen silenced him with a single glare. Her attention returned to David. "You speak with honesty. But honesty can also be weakness," she said. David replied, "Maybe, but sometimes weakness shows who we really are." The hall grew silent again. Even the mocking nobles stopped, sensing the strange tension between their queen and the human. The feast continued, but David noticed something. Every question the queen asked was not about war, not about power. She wanted to know about people, about family, about laughter and love. It was as if she was searching for something she had never known. David spoke about his sister back on Earth, how she used to steal food from his plate when they were kids. The queen listened with an unreadable face, but her eyes softened for a moment. Perhaps she had never heard such small human stories before. Finally, the last dish was removed, and the hall grew quiet. The queen leaned closer, her voice so low that only he could hear. "Human, you have lived, fought, and now eaten beside me, but words are not enough. Tomorrow you will show me more. You will prove, not with your tongue, but with your courage." David's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked. The queen stood, her silver robe flowing like water. She raised her voice so all could hear. "Tomorrow the human will face the trial of fire." Gasps filled the hall. Nobles whispered in shock. Some laughed with cruel delight. David looked around, confused and uneasy. "What's the trial of fire?" he whispered to a nearby servant. The servant gave him a pitying glance and said in a low voice, "Few survive it, human. It is death wearing another name." David's throat went dry. The queen turned to him one last time, her golden eyes glowing. "If you survive, you will not be seen as a prisoner, but as something greater, she said. Then, in a whisper only he could hear, she added, and perhaps. As a husband, the nobles erupted in outrage, the hall shaking with their voices. But David barely heard them. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and disbelief. Tomorrow, he would face death itself, and the alien queen had tied his survival to something far stranger than freedom. The morning came with the sound of war drums. David was pulled from his chamber by armored guards, their faces cold and unfriendly. He walked through high halls until he reached a great stone gate. Beyond it, the crowd of the alien empire roared like a storm. Today was the trial of fire. And he was the main attraction. The gates opened, and David stepped into the arena. The ground was black stone, cracked and burning with rivers of glowing lava beneath. Heat slammed into his skin, making his throat dry. Above him, thousands of aliens filled the seats, cheering for his death. At the highest balcony sat the queen, her golden eyes fixed on him, her crown gleaming in the fiery light. David's chains were removed, and a spear was thrown at his feet. It was heavy, too big for a human, but it was all he had. The announcer shouted in a booming alien voice. By the Queen's command, the human shall face the trial of fire. If he survives, he earns the right to stand. If he fails, his body will burn as ash. The crowd screamed in approval. David bent down, lifted the spear, and whispered under. His breath great, no pressure. A horn sounded, and the first challenge began. From the opposite gate, a massive beast entered. Its body was covered in black scales, and fire dripped from its mouth. Its claws scraped the ground each step. Shaking the arena, David's stomach twisted. He had fought many things in war, but never a monster like this. The beast roared and charged, flames spilling from its jaws. David rolled aside just in time, the heat burning his arm. The crowd laughed at his struggle, shouting insults, but David focused. He remembered his training: small, fast, always move. Never fight power with power. He darted around the beast, using the spear to strike at its legs. The first hit bounced off the thick scales. Useless. The queen watched silently, her face unreadable. David could feel her eyes on him, but he had no time to wonder what she thought. The beast turned and swung its tail, sending David crashing against the stone wall. Pain exploded in his chest, but he forced himself to stand. Blood dripped from his lip, and his breath came hard. The beast charged again, fire building in its throat. David noticed a thin gap in its chest armor, right above the heart. It was small, but it was his only chance, as the beast opened its jaws to burn him alive. David ran forward instead of back. The crowd gasped. He leaped, driving the spear deep into the gap. The weapon sank with a sickening crunch. The beast roared, staggered, and collapsed in flames. The arena shook with shock. Some nobles shouted in anger, others in disbelief. David fell to his knees, exhausted, the heat pressing against him. But the horn sounded again. The trial was not over. From the gates, two more creatures appeared, smaller but faster, with burning wings and razor claws. They screeched as they circled him, fire sparking from their wings. David cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." The creature's dove claws slashing. David barely blocked with the spear, sparks flying as metal met fire. One clawed his shoulder, pain searing. The other swooped low, trying to tear his legs. David rolled, stabbing wildly, the spear cutting across one wing. The beast screeched, crashing into the lava river below. But the second remained, faster and angrier. David's arms ached, his vision blurred. He knew he couldn't last much longer. The winged beast dove again, and this time he didn't dodge. He waited until the last second, braced the spear against the stone. The beast impaled itself as it struck, its body shattering into fire and ash. The arena went silent. David dropped the broken spear, his chest heaving. He was still alive, barely, but the crowd didn't cheer. They stared in disbelief. Finally, the queen rose from her throne. Her robe shimmered in the firelight. Her golden eyes blazing, she raised her hand, silencing all voices. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the entire arena. This human fights not as prey, but as a warrior, she declared. Today, he has shown the courage of fire. And fire does not bow easily. Some nobles shouted protests, but none dared to defy her openly. David stood unsteadily, sweat dripping down his face. He thought the trial was over, until the queen stepped down from her throne. The crowd gasped as she entered the arena herself. Her crown gleamed, her eyes never leaving his. She walked across the burning stone with calm steps. Finally, she stood before him, closer than ever. "You fight like a husband already," she said softly, her words carrying to every corner. David froze, unable to respond. The crowd erupted in chaos, shouts, screams, disbelief. The queen turned to her people. Raising her hand, "The trial is complete, but his true test has only begun," she declared. David's heart pounded. What did she mean? What could be harder than fighting beasts of fire? And why did she keep calling him husband? The answer would come soon, but not tonight. After the trial of fire, David was returned to the queen's chamber. His body was bruised, his arms burned, and his shoulder still bled from the claws of the flying beast. Yet he was alive. The servants tended to his wounds with glowing oils, wrapping his injuries in soft alien cloth. The whispers of the palace had already spread. When night came, the queen entered the chamber. She dismissed the servants with a single wave, leaving only her and David. Her golden eyes studied him carefully. Not like a ruler watching a prisoner, but like a hunter examining prey that refused to die. "You should not have survived," she said calmly. "No human ever has." David smirked. Weakly, though his chest hurt when he laughed. "Maybe I'm just too stubborn to die." For a moment, the queen's lips curved into a faint smile. Then she sat across from him, her silver robe shimmering under the soft lights. "You joke. Even after facing fire and death. Why?" she asked. David shrugged. "Because laughter makes fear smaller. And I'd rather laugh than cry." The queen grew quiet, her eyes thoughtful. "You speak of things my people do not understand," she said softly. "They know power, conquest, and fear, but not laughter, not family, not the bonds you speak of." David tilted his head, surprised. "You mean, you've never had that?" Her expression hardened, as if he had touched something forbidden. "My crown does not allow weakness," she said firmly, "since childhood. I have belonged to the throne, not to family." David felt a strange pull in his chest. For the first time, he saw more than a ruler or a queen. He saw a lonely woman behind the crown. Someone who had never known simple warmth. "On Earth," he said gently, "we tease our brothers. We argue with sisters. We laugh with our parents. Sometimes it feels annoying, but it's love, and it keeps us strong." The queen's gaze softened for just a second before she quickly looked away. "You speak as if such bonds are stronger than armies." "They are," David replied, "because an army can be broken, but love, it stays." Silence filled the chamber, heavy, but not hostile. The queen's golden eyes locked with his, and for the first time, it did not look like a ruler studying a subject. She looked like a woman listening, trying to understand, but outside the chamber, not all were pleased. In the shadows of the palace halls, alien nobles whispered, "The queen listens to the human too much." One hissed, "He poisons her mind with weakness." Another spat, "If this continues, she will destroy the empire for him." Dark plans were already forming back inside. the queen stood and walked closer to David. She raised her hand and touched his bandaged shoulder lightly. Her fingers were cool against his burned skin. "You bleed for me," she said softly. Almost to herself, "My own generals would not have risked so much, yet you did. Why?" David looked at her, his voice steady, "Because it was the right thing to do." The queen studied him, silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Strange. Human. You confuse me." Their eyes locked again, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not just ruler and prisoner, not just warrior and queen, something more fragile. Something dangerous, but before the moment could deepen. The doors burst open. A guard rushed in, bowing low, his voice urgent. "Your Majesty? An assassin has been caught in the lower halls. He carried poison meant for your cup." The queen's expression turned to ice, her golden eyes blazing with fury. She rose instantly, her robe sweeping like fire. "Bring him before me," she ordered. Moments later, the guards dragged in a trembling alien noble, his hands bound. The queen's voice was cold. "You dared to poison me." The noble spat. "Not poison for you, Majesty the human. He corrupts you, he weakens you. We will not allow it." Gasps filled the chamber. David's stomach tightened. They wanted him dead. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he was becoming to her. The queen raised her hand, her voice sharp as a blade. "Take him away. His tongue has signed." His death. The guards dragged the noble out, his screams echoing in the halls. The chamber fell silent again, heavy with unspoken danger. The queen turned to David, her face unreadable. "You see now," she said quietly, "you are not safe. Here, every step you take, every breath you draw, my court will want it gone. And yet, I cannot let you go." Her words lingered, filled with weight. David felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something harder to name. The queen walked closer until she stood only a step away. Her golden eyes shone in the dim light. Her voice low and steady. "If you stay with me, human, you will never know peace again," she said. "Every night will bring daggers in the dark. Every day will bring war. So I ask you this, will you remain at my side, knowing death will follow?" "Us both." David's throat went dry, his heart pounding. Her question was not just about survival, it was about something far deeper. He opened his mouth to answer, but the chamber doors shook violently. A horn blared outside, followed by the sound of rushing footsteps and shouts. A voice cried, "Enemies within the palace." The queen's expression hardened, and she reached for her weapon. David's choice would have to wait, because death had already arrived. The palace shook with noise. Shouts echoed through the stone halls. The clash of steel and the roar of alien horns filled the air. David pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his wounds. The queen already stood tall, her golden eyes blazing with cold fury, a long spear in her hand. "Stay close to me," she commanded, before David could argue. The chamber doors burst open. A wave of armored rebels stormed in, their weapons raised. They were not common soldiers, they wore the insignia of high houses. Nobles who had betrayed their queen, the leader. A scarred alien with burning red eyes pointed his blade at her. "Your reign is over, my queen," he spat. "You have been blinded by this human filth, and we will not follow a ruler who chooses weakness." David felt the words slice deeper than any weapon. He wanted to speak, but the queen stepped forward, her voice sharp like lightning. "You dare challenge me? In my own hall. I will carve your treason into the walls." She struck first, her spear flashing like silver fire. 2 rebels fell instantly, their bodies crashing against the stone floor. David grabbed a fallen sword, its weight strange in his hands, but he raised it anyway. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't his fight, but if he stood still, he would die, and worse, she would fall. The battle inside the chamber exploded. Blades clashed, sparks lit the air. Alien blood spilled across the floor. David swung clumsily, but with desperate strength. Blocking strikes, kicking one rebel back, every breath burned his chest. But his will burned hotter. The queen moved like a storm. Her spear tore through armor and bone, her robe swirling like living fire. Every enemy she struck fell screaming. Yet more kept coming. The nobles had planned this well. They meant to kill her tonight. At one point, a rebel lunged straight for her back. David saw it before she did. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, slamming into the attacker. The blade slashed across his arm, hot pain tearing through his flesh. But he drove the sword he held straight into the rebel's chest. The queen turned, her eyes widening as she saw his blood spill. For a moment, her fury changed into something else, something human. But then her face hardened again, and she spun. Back to the fight. The battle raged until the chamber was filled with bodies and the stink of blood. Finally, the last rebel fell with a broken cry. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Broken only by David's ragged breaths, the queen lowered her spear, her robe torn, her silver hair streaked with sweat and blood. She turned to David, her golden eyes burning with something he could not read. "You bleed again for me," she whispered. "You fight my enemies, even when you could flee." "Why?" David, his arm dripping with blood, leaned against the wall. "Because running isn't who I am," he said through clenched teeth, "and maybe you're worth fighting for." The queen froze, her gaze locked on his. Her lips parted as if to speak. But before she could, more guards rushed into the chamber. Not rebels this time, her loyal ones. They bowed quickly. "Majesty, the inner halls are compromised. The rebels open the gates. They are inside the palace." Her jaw tightened. "Then we crush them all," she growled. But the guard hesitated. "Majesty, it is worse. They do not only come for your crown, they come for the human. They mean to kill him above all." The queen's eyes flashed like fire. She stepped closer to David, her spear still in her grip. "He is under my protection," she said, her voice like thunder. "Any who touch him will face my wrath." The guards bowed, but fear still lingered in their eyes. Everyone knew the truth. Now the queen's bond with the human was no longer hidden. And bonds like that could shake empires. As the guards prepared to escort them, David leaned closer and whispered, "They won't stop, will they?" "No," she admitted quietly. "They will keep coming. Every noble, every rival, they will strike again and again, because you have become my weakness." David looked at her, his voice low but steady. "Or maybe I've become your strength." For a moment, the queen said nothing. Then her hand brushed lightly against his, a gesture so small yet so dangerous. If anyone saw, the court would explode with fury. But before either could speak further, the ground beneath them shook. The sound of an explosion ripped through the palace. Flames lit the hall outside the chamber, and screams rose in the distance. The queen's eyes narrowed. "They have brought war inside my walls." She hissed. Her gaze shifted to David. "You must stay with me. If they capture you, they will not kill you quickly. They will make you suffer to break me." David's heart pounded. He had never felt so far from Earth, yet never so deeply bound to another being. The alien queen, fierce and proud, was no longer just a ruler in his eyes. She was someone he could not abandon, even if death was certain. The queen raised her spear, her golden eyes glowing in the firelight. "Come, human," she said with deadly calm. "We go to war." And as they stepped into the burning halls together, David knew one thing. The bond between them was no longer hidden. It was a weapon, and every enemy in the palace would soon taste its edge. Asterisk, the palace was burning. Flames licked the high walls. Smoke rolled through the golden halls, and the sound of steel rang like thunder. David followed the queen through the chaos, his arm aching from his wound, but his grip on the sword unshaken. Everywhere they turned, rebels poured in, their armor marked with the symbols of rival houses. The queen moved like a storm of fire. Her spear cut through her enemies as if they were shadows. She showed no fear, no weakness, but her golden eyes always flicked toward David, as if making sure he was still alive. They reached the grand hall, the heart of the palace. The place that once held banquets and ceremonies now roared with screams and blood. Rebels clashed with loyal guards. Bodies littered the marble floor, and the great crystal pillars cracked under the weight of war. The leader of the rebellion stood at the far end, his scarred face twisted in fury. He wore black armor trimmed with silver, his massive blade glowing with heat. "Your time is finished, Queen," he roared above the battle. "You shame us with your weakness, kneeling beside a human." The words echoed across the hall. All eyes turned toward David, some filled with hate, others with disbelief. David felt the weight of it crash over him, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to look away. The queen stepped forward, her spear glowing like a burning star. "My rule is not weakness," she thundered. "My bond with him is not shame, but power you cannot understand." The hall erupted in shouts, the rebels sneering, the loyalists roaring in support. And then the battle began again, louder, fiercer than before. The queen launched herself at the rebel leader, their weapons colliding with a sound that split the air. Every strike shook the ground, sparks flying like stars. The two rulers fought as if the world itself depended on it. Meanwhile, David fought his own war. Rebels swarmed toward him, eager to cut down the human who had changed their queen. He blocked one strike, kicked another back, and slammed his sword through a rebel's chest. Pain shot through his injured arm, but he pushed forward, refusing to fall. One rebel almost broke through his guard, but before the blade could land, a loyal guard shielded him. Taking the blow, David staggered back, the guard giving him a nod, even as blood poured from his side. "Stand, human," the guard whispered, "for her." The words burned into David's mind. He tightened his grip, fought harder. For every step he took, he thought of the queen, her fire, her strength, and the strange bond pulling them closer with every heartbeat. At the center of the hall, the duel between the queen and the rebel leader raged. The rebel's blade slammed into her spear again and again. Finally, he forced her back, his weapon nearly breaking hers. "You cannot win, Queen," he growled. "Your people see the truth. You risk your empire for this human. Tonight, he dies, and you die with him." David's blood ran cold. The rebel leader turned his burning eyes on him. Raising his blade, the distance between them felt small, deadly, but before the strike could fall, the queen spun forward with a roar, her spear striking like lightning. The rebel's blade barely blocked it, sparks exploding across the hall. The force of the clash sent both rulers staggering back. The hall shook as if the palace itself trembled at their fury. David's heart pounded. He knew this wasn't just her fight anymore, it was theirs, together. But he also knew something else. The rebels wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. Suddenly, a horn echoed through the burning halls. The sound was sharp, ancient, filled with power. Both sides froze for a heartbeat. The rebel leader's eyes widened. "No, not now," he muttered, from the shadows of the broken crystal pillars. New figures emerged, tall, armored in silver and black, carrying banners of an ancient house long thought destroyed. The queen's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping low. "Old enemies rise from the grave," she whispered. "This is no longer rebellion, is war." David felt the air grow heavier. The new army filled the hall, their weapons gleaming, their faces hidden behind masks. They bowed not to the queen, not to the rebel leader, but to a figure cloaked in darkness who stepped forward slowly. The figure's voice was cold as ice. You fight like children for scraps of power. But this empire is mine to claim, and I will burn both of you to ash. The hall fell into silence. Even the rebel leader looked shaken. The queen tightened her grip on her spear, her golden eyes blazing. David raised his sword, his breath ragged but steady. He didn't know who this new enemy was. But he knew one thing: the fight for survival had just begun, and the bond between him and the queen would be tested in ways neither could imagine.